Howdy, friends. So I have a video for you that may only be interesting to some of you. But I got today a package in the mail that I'm going to open up, and I thought I would do a little unboxing and little comparison between a couple Marseilles decks. So this may not be remotely interesting to some of you, but hopefully it is. So what I purchased recently, well, actually not that recently. I purchased it a couple weeks ago, but because it was coming from France, it took a while. This is the Noblet, Flornoy, Jean-Claude Flornoy, Marseille Tarot. And I got this because the other Marseille version, the other French Marseille style that I had was the Jodorowsky Camoin, which is based on the Conver deck. I had some problems with it. Again, it's not, it's not the end of the world, right? But as I learned that I was enjoying working with the decks, I thought it might be interesting. Oh, there's a extra card glued to this. I like this. So this is the 2014 edition. I thought it might be interesting to explore another adaptation that was less influenced by the sort of assumptions of the author, for lack of a better term. So, I mean, if you've read Jodorowsky's book, which has some good stuff in it, you know that he has some strong feelings about the symbolism of the deck, and they don't necessarily gel with what's actually in the deck. So, in the adaptation that he worked on with Philippe Camoin, there are some things they did that are not necessarily found in the Conver deck. I've talked about the egg in the High Priestess, which I can't find in other examples. And I also just like buying decks. And the Jean Noblet is interesting because it is the earliest that we know of Marseille style deck. So it comes with this little book. It's actually sort of a fairly thick little book, although I imagine that it's not all in English. So there's a little preface here, and it says, here's the oldest known tarot, the earliest progenitor of the so-called Marseille tradition. It is therefore ironic that its creator, Jean Noblet, actually worked in Paris. By bringing this deck out of the shadows, Jean-Claude Flornoy sparked controversy among the professors, prophets, and pundits of tarot. Thousands of works dedicated to the tarot became flawed, questionable, or at best unclear. Esoteric theories have collapsed before these cards of unusual size and uncommon strength. The reduced dimensions of the cards make them better adapted to the hand, and the singular, intensely dynamic, and atypical graphic messages confuse the tarot log and upset his cherished ideologies. So lots to find dramatic there. So actually, this is all in English. Interesting. So I probably will likely go through that. I'm gonna put the fool aside. So anyway, I thought it would be interesting to just look at these guys a little bit more closely. In fact, I wonder if I can get closer even. I'm going to make a little bit of a shaky mess right now, and I'm going to beg your forgiveness as I attempt to elegantly, as I unsuccessfully attempt, there we go, to look at these more closely. I am a fan of the back of this deck. So the backing has this cool sort of retro thing, and I think that's in fact what the backing looked like on the original deck. And then this is the Conver, the Jodorowsky. Now, when I was shopping around for Marseille decks initially, what I was hoping for was the CBD, but that's not easy to get right now. But I do like the size of this, especially for the spread that I'm digging right now, the Council of 13, which I did a video on. So I thought I would just go through. Now, this is like the Jodorowsky. It is redrawn and recolored. But the first thing I can see right out of the gate is that the pure white of the Jodorowsky, in comparison to the sort of cream color of the Noblet. So I'm just gonna sort of walk through and look at them together, and maybe you'll enjoy. The magicians are very similar. Even down to the implements on the table. It's always these little subtle things that are interesting. Like and I know from reading that what looks like the magician's wand here is broken off in the Noblet, and it has a distinctly penile quality to it, which is odd. Yeah, it's interesting, but very similar overall. Like the landscape is similar. The sort of growing plant life is similar, even the perspective. So that's the magician. Very, very similar with the pipesse. This is the infamous egg that I've mentioned many times. So really, really close. Here we have l'Impertus. My heritage on both sides of my family is French-Canadian, and my actual last name is French-Canadian, if you visited my website or my Etsy shop. So this is my really lame and embarrassing attempt to pronounce them. So again, really similar. In this case, we've got an empress facing front, and this one's sort of looking off to the side. I also have to say I'm reading, I think it's Jean-Michel David's book, about specifically using the Noblet Tarot, which is another reason I'm happy to have it, although that wasn't the reason I got it, because I actually started reading the book after I ordered this. But I'm happy to have it. So here we've got the emperors facing each other. It's also worth noting that in the style of older cards, these do not have rounded corners, which I actually thought I wouldn't like, but having worked now with two Il Meneghello decks that I really like, it doesn't bother me much, other than that it hooks on fabric, which is annoying. There's a quality of art to this that feels a bit more like a playing card. These feel a bit more refined, interestingly, which I guess makes sense. It's an older deck. Very similar popes, different staff. I'm such a fan of the Marseilles in a way I never thought I would be. Very similar lover cards, even down to the postures. The Cupid or the angel figure is very, very different. Whoops. I did not expect to love this deck, or to like Marseille or Pip style decks, as I've talked about, or Marseille in particular. I thought it would be very difficult to tell the difference between the suits. I thought that it would be frustrating not to have the Waite-Smith imagery, but I don't mind it that much. Very similar chariots in the way they're looking, and the way the horses are looking. Justice. Again, if you see, this is a much simpler art style than this. But I did look at a bunch of the Flornoy editions that they have. This is, I should say, is it on the box? I don't think it does say it. Tarot-history.com, I think, is where it's from. Or in French, it's editionletero.com. See, a terrible French accent. Embarrassing. Although not that embarrassing, because I didn't grow up speaking French. My grandparents did. I think my mother, actually, when she was a child, barely spoke English because my family spoke French. Very similar hermits. Le Mythe. Very similar Wheels of Fortune. I have never, although we have a human figure on the Noblet and a more animal figure on the Conver. I've never liked this card. In fact, I can't think of an edition of or an adaptation of this card that I actually like. Very, very similar force, strength. I don't know why I don't like the Wheel of Fortune, but I don't. Very different Hanged Man. I love that in French it's Le Pendu. Like, I sound like Julia Child, right, with my terrible French. There's something about the French title that makes me think of suspension, which I don't get with the Hanged Man, you know? So I like that. This is a much more like the Hanged Man. Let me bring this up closer. He looks either dead or manic. You know, I mean, we know scientifically that a hanged man is likely to have his tongue loll all over his mouth, but his hands look very cartoonish. This one has a much more esoteric, you know, serene quality to it. But again, I sort of wish I had an edition of the Conver that was not sort of contaminated, for lack of a better word, by Jodorowsky's and Camoin's views. And the reason I wanted the CBD is because I think what Yoav Ben-Dov attempted to do was restore it to its initial state and not infuse or interpolate in it symbolism that wasn't there. So the big difference here, and what's interesting is that there's a lot of writing about how this is a card without a title, but the Conver deck, which this is based on, is an earlier card. This card does have death on it, so this one is titled. So in a lot of books that I've read, which aren't that many, you know, the Trump 13 is sort of known for not having a title, but this earlier deck does have one. Similar in look, this has a bit more of a human quality, obviously, and they're facing different ways, but it's interesting. So Temperance is very similar. The thing that Ben-Dov did do, if you see a walkthrough of his version, is that he did change the expressions on the faces a little bit. These have a much less human quality than these, but we still have the very similar quality. And what's interesting is that these creatures are not, like, these are definitely human. These are not necessarily human, which is interesting. Similar towers. This is always something that's interesting to me in the coloring, is that, you know, the face is different than the body. Whoops. But very similar positions and setups. Got the moon facing front and the moon looking to the left. But otherwise pretty similar. This is, you know, in fact, I think from like a beauty standpoint, it's probably easier to say that the Conver is prettier. It, you know, it has a more refined quality to it. But what drew me to this, the Noblet or the Noblet, Noblet, I don't know how to pronounce it, is its sort of crudeness, so to speak. So here's the sun. I don't know if you can tell in the video, but this is a much thicker deck too. The cardstock of this one is really thin. It's held up well. I mean, I've shuffled it quite a bit, and it riffle shuffles really well. This is much more cardboardy, so I'm interested to see how it's going to shuffle. But this is thicker. Very, very similar. This appears to be more clearly a female figure. And these both appear to be male. Very similar. Judgment. There's something naive in a good way about the Noblet. Similar worlds. Bit different, but this world has a cape. And I'll just go through the minors quickly. Here's the Fool. I mean, the big difference, I guess, with the Fool is that you can see his penis, and you can't on this one. This also looks a bit more precarious as the dog is ripping his pants, but the dog is going for the goods in that case, which is interesting. All right, so I figure that the order. I mean, if you're not interested in seeing the comparison of the pips, which are going to be very, very similar, then I completely understand. Feel free to stop watching now, but I am going to record this because it is interesting to me, because it's the subtle differences that are fascinating. In my case. So here we are in the suit of coins. And it is subtle, you know what I mean? The foliage is all there. The decoration is there. It's just really different, which, you know, is the case when you have different artists doing the same thing. This does not have any modern attributions. This does. The suit of coins is numbered in the Noblet and not in the Conver. So in this case, we're in very similar territory. The Conver, the Jodorowsky Conver, it's actually listed when you buy it as the Camoin, because he's the publisher of it. The claim, at any rate, is that he's a descendant of the original publisher. So if you're looking for it. The other thing is that this is obviously a smaller deck. The theory with this deck is that it's actually twice as tall as it is wide. So it's its own double, which if you read certainly the Bendov book, and I think even in the Jodorowsky book, that's mentioned as important. This is not that. Sorry, my OCD kicks in from time to time. I also just like to, engage with and touch the cards. The other thing is that in terms of telling reversals, the new deck, the Jodorowsky Camoin Conver, has a little copyright image in it. The Noblet does not. So you can decide what's upright and reversed. It's a little easier to tell automatically. I don't know why, but I don't like yellow, so I'm kind of more drawn to the oranges of this deck than the yellows of this one. But as you can see, they're very, very similar in this case. In fact, I'm going to speed up a tad. And I guess this is where we get into the thing of we hear Marseille style. These are, even though this was created in Paris, these are Marseille decks. Now, there are the Tarocco Neoclassico, which I have been using a lot. You could say is Marseille style, but it's actually Italian influenced, and it's not a Marseille deck, as I'm sure you've heard before. So what I'm really interested in seeing the court cards. I love seeing the similarities and the differences. Whoops. And you can see how similar they really, really are. So this is useful to know too, that if you are like reading like the Jodorowsky book and the Bendov book both use different versions of the Conver deck. The book that I'm reading now, the Jean-Michel David book, I think is his name, I need to go look, is based on the Noblet. But if you don't have, if you have one and not the other and you're really interested in it, it doesn't really matter all that much because the similarities outweigh the differences. And the ultimate reason why I chose to get another was that I wanted something that felt, and that was a little truer to its own source. You can see the coloration of the wands is very different, but it is Marseille left, right, and center. Even down to like the embellishments are different, but this is a very slippery deck too, I should say. The embellishments are different, but they're in the same places. So I'm gonna speed up again and get to the core. This is interesting to me, but I know that for a lot of people, nothing is more boring than looking at the minors of a Marseille deck. And I was for many years among them. And there are more beautiful, even pip decks to look at historically and modern than the Marseille. But I am charmed by it in a way that I guess I can chalk up to my own family's French heritage. But very, very similar. It just tickles me. One thing that's weird about the Noblet deck are these weird, like, peekaboo nipples on some of the women. I don't know. I'd love to know if there's some sort of, like, weird winky reason for that, or if it's just sort of a... Because there's a dot there, that are not all that different from the ones on her. And if those are nipples, they're oddly placed. Then again, I don't spend a lot of time looking at anyone's nipples, so... if you're wondering about me... Ooh, these are so slippery. So similar. I mean, today we would call this copyright infringement, wouldn't we? Just taking someone else's. Although tarot has been such an interesting thing, right? Because let's start with Rider-Waite, right? Which was the first deck to, in modern times, use situational pips. Everyone who has come since has a relationship, in a way, I would say, to that deck. Whether they choose to look in another direction or to mimic it. In essence, every modern deck that falls into the Rider-Waite-Smith system is ripping off Pamela Coleman Smith. I mean, essentially, it'd be very, very easy to accuse anyone who made a Rider-Waite-Smith deck of copyright infringement if the copyright were still in force. And I know there's controversy about that, because if you ask certain publishers, they'll tell you that the Rider-Waite-Smith copyright is still in force, although copyright law seems to suggest that that's not the case anymore. I think 1923 is the cutoff for copyright now, given the math of it. So, it is an interesting thing to look at these decks and see how more or less the evolution wasn't that great. You know what I mean? It wasn't that different. The similarities are so close. You would be hard pressed if you weren't interested in studying the differences, or if you were fine with one you had, you'd be hard pressed to find a reason to buy another Marseille deck than the one you had, because, you know, ultimately it's a choice of style. And if you don't like these sort of blocky woodblock prints, then it's, you know, you're not going to like any Marseille deck. But the choice is so interesting. The you know, and when we think about Thoth or Tot or Thoth, I don't know how to pronounce that either, which is a system that actually really doesn't draw me all that much. You know, there are modern adaptations of that too. So in essence, what you see with the Noblet is a sort of more crude iteration of the Marseille. I'm going to put our good friend Jodorowsky aside and see how this shuffles. You know, it's pretty stiff. You know, it can be riffled. But not easily. This isn't a super expensive, like this, the cardstock is like cardstock that you would get in a deck. So it's not like this is like super, this isn't like Il Meneghello art paper. This, you know, it's cardstock. And so I don't think you'd necessarily, if you got this deck, want to worry about ruining it. You know what I mean? It's definitely a deck that's made to be used, I feel like. Not that the Il Meneghello ones aren't, but they these are meant to be cards and not so much works of art. Maybe that's not a nice way to say it. Clearly, Jean-Claude Flornoy has put a lot of work into his Marseille. Oh boy, I really cannot shuffle when there's a camera. It's the curse. It's totally in the way, which is always why I'm shooting from the side rather than around, but even then it's like, I can't do it. But it does shuffle well. And he has a couple other classic iterations of the Marseille. So there's I think the Jean Dodal edition, which if you watch the Terrology documentary, I think is what Enrique Enriquez is using. There's a documentary I'd love to chat about at some point. All right, I want to lay these out and just see how they feel. I'm living for the spread that I shared with you last week or the week before, and I don't know if I can make it fit, but I want to see the Council of 13 spread. So let me once again create a ruckus for a moment and see if I can make this fit. And even if I can't do it all, maybe I'll just move the camera. So I'm not going to do a reading with this, but I do love that spread so much, and I think it's so useful. And I'm really happy to have this deck. I guess I was happy to have the other one I showed you, but once I read the book and I started reading what had been kind of interpolated into the deck, I got irritated. I've talked about it before. I won't belabor the point. All right. The Temperance is telling me to relax, so I'm going to do that. So we're going to put her in the middle. This is almost going to fit, but we'll see. So we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Can you see that? Yep. 8. You won't be able to see that. Boom. Boom. I think I laid that out wrong. It should go boom, 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 but whatever. It's just to see how it looks. Oh, that's not terrible. Let me do this. Let me just make a big damn mess. Maybe you can see the big damn mess that the rest of my apartment is. No, I'm making a big damn mess of this. All right, well, you can see almost all of it. So, see, this is what I do. This is why perfectionism is bad, right? Because I could have just left it the way it was and said, oh, it looks cool, and I'm not going to do a reading anyway, so who cares? And I think I can already tell that it doesn't matter. You're still not going to be able to see it. You can see a little better. Anyway, so this is what it looks like out in a spread. Another reason why I like this is, and got it, is because of the small size. This will probably be a deck that I carry with me, because it is small and easy to carry. So if you want to see how to read this spread, I do have a video on it. I'll try to remember to link to it below, but it wasn't that long ago, so you can find it. But that's my little, hopefully not too tedious walkthrough of these two Marseille decks. And I hope that this was interesting, and I hope that you're well, and I'll talk to you later. Have a good week.